I answered the playtest call on BGG from the designer of Mrs. Thatcher's War, Ben Madison, because I had played many times Don't Tread on Me, and I thought I was going to do a video on that, but I didn't because there are so many good videos already about it. But I really like that game a lot, and I have sort of an interest in the Falkland Islands War, it being something that was like vaguely in my memory bank, but I wasn't really paying attention to it so much at the time, being relatively young. So I was interested in this, and he sent me the playtest kit, and I asked him if I could have his permission to show you some of it, and he said I could, and that's what I'm doing. I don't know him. I am not doing this because he asked me to or anything like that. I actually asked him if I could show it because I enjoyed playing through the game and thought it might be of some interest. So what I'm showing you here are just the overall components of the game. This is the counter sheet. This is, again, these are playtest components, so this is basically a color Xerox. This is the uncut counters on the counter sheet. There is the map where most of the action takes place of the East Falkland Island, and then here is the larger strategic map. A bit of it is missing up here, where you see the coast of Argentina and the Falkland Islands here, and your units that are going to be coming in. And there are some charts and tables here with the box for the units not in play and some of the indications that you'll need to conduct ground combat and some other things. So we'll take a quick look at these in a bit more detail. If you've played a game by Ben Madison before, you know that there are tons of historical details and cultural and political factors thrown into what ends up being a pretty small game box, and there's no difference here. This is the case, and the markers, as you can see, reflect that. So in addition to the units that you have both for the British forces as well as Argentina, both land and air, you also have things that come in as a result of some of the events, like there is the Pope possibly visiting and some diplomacy that may happen. Weather, of course, is an issue here, and you have Chilean radar that can come in as a result of an event that will give you a modification to some combat, as well as other support units. So those are the counters represented in the middle here, and again, up here in the blue, you have what is the Argentinian units, both air and ground, and also these are units that come in, ground units that supply air units, and the British forces here with other support units coming in during the course of the game. That you have your Harrier units here. Helicopters can possibly come in to help you. These markers, British ground support and Argentine ground support, are tracked on a support track that will help you out during ground forces depending on the setup of the map to the right here, which we'll look at in a second. And yeah, there are 88 counters, and this I'm showing you here now is the starting setup of the game. And you've got your turn track here at the bottom reflecting the extent of the war. And you are ultimately, your goal, as was the reality, is to land in San Carlos by the ground forces once you have air superiority, and make your way to Stanley and occupy Stanley, which is currently being occupied by the Argentinians. What's interesting about the map is it's meant to be three-dimensional. So you can see here, hope you can see these dotted lines here. These are delineating various air sectors. So here's air sector A and air sector B, C, D, and E. You cannot land any ground forces until turn 7. And you cannot move ground forces to the east until you have air superiority in that sector. So the game is working on two levels. There is both ground combat and air combat. Air combat is what begins, at least exclusively, in the first 6 turns of the game before you have the potential for even ground forces to land and move. There are 3 movement tracks here, as the designer says in his designer notes, this follows the sort of states of siege model of game, if anyone's familiar with that, where their movement is along these three tracks. And again, the movement is dependent upon a number of different forces, including whether or not you have helicopters, whether or not you do have air superiority, and whether or not you encounter any hostile ground forces. At the setup, you have some sort of fog of war where you are told to place upside down a bunch of Argentinian forces, so you don't really know what you're going to be encountering. They could be patrol forces, they could be just regular ground forces, there could be a minefield. So depending on what you encounter, you have to respond to that accordingly. This is a look at the strategic map that also comes with the game, where you have both the British support forces that can come in, that are already here and that come in to play, as well as the support on Ascension Island that can come in based on various turns. This is the ground support track that I referred to earlier, and depending on certain events, you can add various amounts, 3, 5 for the Argentinians, 4, 7, or 9 for the British, in ground combat. And the game will direct you as to whether you can increase and expect to have any of that ground support. The Argentinians are coming in from the mainland up here, and again, you've got some fog of war because you've got these unknown counters. There are 11 of them that are supporting military air capacity for the Argentinians that come in, as well as these units that will be bringing in the air forces down to the map to conduct combat and to fight with you over air superiority. Of course, weather plays a big role in the game, and the possibility exists for fog, fair weather, rain or snow, squalls, or gales, in which case you have to actually skip your entire turn if you roll for that. And they all have various impacts on the game, and up here you can't totally see it, is the weather table. At the top of the map here is the Argentine repair pool. Again, you can't really see it, and the British repair pool, where the aircraft go after being used, and then there are game rules for how they come back into the game and to what extent they can be successfully repaired on the next turn. Just one page of charts and tables here, and you've got some ground combat modifiers in a table here, and basic tables to determine airstrike modifications, and also things that happen when the task force, which is represented on that strategic map, engages in combat. You have your discard pile and the units not in play box. The last thing I'll show you is there's a very detailed sequence of play, A through J, with a bunch of phases in them. Some of them cannot happen in bad weather, and that is referenced by the triangle here. So you cannot actually conduct a bunch of air combat or anything in the air if the weather is in particularly bad shape. This is your air battle results table here, and you have, this will be familiar to you if you have played, say, Don't Tread on Me. I haven't played the other game in this series on Napoleon, but I'm assuming it's similar. The player aid card that is with news headlines. Sorry about that, I ran out of memory there. So in this game, the news headlines come at the end of the turn, whereas in Don't Tread on Me, believe, my memory serves, they come at the beginning of the turn. And typical of Ben Madison's games, there's a lot of flavor here, and the headlines are explained in detail in the rules. The rules themselves are fairly, I thought they were fairly clear. This is toward the end of the playtesting, and it felt to me like very, very complete. The comments that I were making were pretty minor, I'd say. I want to thank Ben Madison for letting me do this little video and show you a little bit of Mrs. Thatcher's War, which I enjoyed quite a bit and which is coming soon from White Dog Games.